May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord. You are our rock. You are our Redeemer. Amen. Last Sunday, my twin teenage boys had a bunch of friends over for the Super Bowl. Needless to say, I was told to make myself scarce, although I was welcome to deliver platters of food at regular intervals. While I did keep my distance, I could hear the banter from the family room, and what I noticed about this group of boys was their need to categorize themselves. There was the obvious question of who was a Chiefs fan and who was an Eagles fan. Fly, Eagles, fly. Then there was the critical question of who thought that Travis Kelce should propose to Taylor Swift and who thought they should break up. There was conversation about who was in which math class, who had applied for which high school programs, and who was trying out for which spring sport. I know that trying to figure out who you are in relation to your peers and the world around you is a natural task of adolescence, but it was striking to hear it play out in real time over chicken tenders and fried cheese. And really, while those of us adults would like to think that we are more evolved than we were as teenagers, the truth is that we continue to categorize ourselves. Perhaps this feels truer now than ever before. In 2008, author Bill Bishop published a book called The Big Sort: Why the Clustering of Like-Minded Americans is Tearing Us Apart. Bishop laid out demographic evidence about how Americans were increasingly sorting themselves into alarmingly homogeneous communities, surrounding themselves with people and media that matched their lifestyles and beliefs. He warned that this was leading to a country that would be ideologically inbred, where people wouldn't know or understand their neighbors who didn't fall into the same categories. Now, 17 years later, perhaps we can agree that he was right, particularly when it comes to politics. I don't know about you, but when I encounter someone new these days, I find myself trying to figure out how we do or don't align. My inclination is to sort them rather than to simply get to know them. Which brings us to our gospel reading from today. This morning we heard the Beatitudes from Luke's gospel. Matthew has his own version, but Luke takes things a bit further by adding the woes. And I wonder if our tendency when we hear these well-known words of Jesus is to try to categorize ourselves, just as we do in so many other areas of our lives. We wonder if we count as the poor and the persecuted who are blessed, or if we are the rich and the content that Jesus condemns. How about those with whom we disagree? Which category do they fall in? This morning, I want to suggest that giving in to this temptation to sort ourselves misses the point when it comes to the Beatitudes. Let's consider the context of the passage. Jesus is in his early days of his ministry. He has called his disciples and had a few run-ins with the Pharisees. Word of his healings and miracles has spread. Note what Luke tells us at the beginning of today's passage. A great crowd has gathered, a multitude of people from Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. The implication is that the crowd gathered is diverse, from different places and different backgrounds. Luke says, they had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out of him and healed all of them. Then Jesus speaks to the crowd that has come seeking his help, promising that those who are poor, hungry, grieving, and persecuted are blessed. What does Jesus mean by this blessedness? It is not as if it is particularly appealing to be poor or hungry or persecuted. And it is clear that the people seeking him had a variety of challenges. What they shared was their need to encounter Jesus. This was the common thread. What made them blessed in Jesus' eyes was not their particular struggles, but their knowledge of their need for God. The same is true for us. Blessedness is rooted in the awareness of our vulnerability and the trust that we are dependent on God and one another. In contrast, Luke offers the woes to those who are rich and full and laughing. Ironically, the Greek word for woe can be translated as the sound woe, or even yikes. New Testament scholar Matt Skinner explains that when Jesus addresses those in the woe category, he is not saying that they are damned or cursed. Instead, we might imagine him sighing deeply and saying, "Oh, geez, your vision is so small. You have subscribed to false promises about what makes a meaningful life. If only you knew what you were missing out on." Understood in this way, those woes are warnings about putting our trust elsewhere, in wealth or success or contentment or a false sense of independence, all things that draw us away from God. And while we may be inclined to sort ourselves into one category or another, the truth is that the Christian life is more complicated than that. We live in a constant tension between putting our trust in God and putting our trust in things of this world. Some moments we know our need for God more profoundly. Other times, we, and especially those of us with the privilege of material abundance, we default to finding comfort in the things that Luke warns us against. Unlike so many of the other ways that we categorize ourselves, our relationship with God is not static. God is always drawing closer to us. We are sometimes more open and sometimes more resistant. The Beatitudes challenge us to see the incredible blessing when we are the former, when we lean in to that openness. I think that the Beatitudes also invite us to expand our understanding of blessedness. If blessedness comes in the hard places of our lives, then we can assume that the Beatitudes are just examples of what it might look like. As I thought about this, I decided to take the liberty of adding to Jesus' list of who is blessed. It seems that there are signs of blessedness everywhere. In my role here at St. Paul's, I often visit people who are sick or incapacitated. I see how hard it is to be wholly dependent on others, and I see how exhausting it is to be a caregiver. Blessed are those who are unable to care for themselves, and blessed are those who selflessly care for them. On Monday, just across the street, there was a march in solidarity with trans youth and young adults who are being affected by the suspension of trans health care for people under age 19. Blessed are the medical professionals who are being prohibited from doing their jobs, and blessed are those who do not have access to the health care they need. Also this week, clergy from around the diocese joined a Zoom meeting to discuss current challenges. Many congregations have significant immigrant populations, and one concern was about what to do if immigration and custom enforcement officers, or ICE, show up at your church? Meanwhile, colleagues in Northern Virginia explained that they are caring for large numbers of parishioners who have lost their jobs with the federal government and USAID. Blessed are those who are living with fear and uncertainty. Also this week, I learned that an old high school friend had died of a drug overdose, and my heart hurt to think about the suffering that she and her family endured. Blessed are those who struggle with addiction, and blessed are those who are fighting to stay sober. And of course, the list goes on. Blessed are those who are lonely. Blessed are exhausted and worried parents. Blessed are those who are fighting for justice and equality. Blessed are victims of violence. Blessed are those who just got awful diagnoses. Blessed are those who are struggling in their marriages. And blessed are those who still grieve the loss of a spouse, even when the rest of the world has moved on. I could keep going, and you will have your own list, of course. But the good news of this morning's passage is Jesus' promise that we are welcomed and held in our need for him. That we live in a world that values success and independence. We are reminded that it is in our weakness and vulnerability that we are drawn closer to the heart of God, where true blessing is found. This passage also calls us to see the blessedness in one another. What would our world look like if instead of simply trying to categorize one another, we saw each person we encountered through God's eyes, with love and compassion first and foremost? The Beatitudes come to us today as an invitation to see the blessedness in ourselves and every other child of God. Amen.